Jason,
Gary,
You know what a math question looks like, don't you?
I've seen a few.
I didn't want to assume because if presuming makes you presumptuous, does assuming make you assumptuous?
I'm not sure what that means.
Okay.
Assumptuous?
Assumptuous. That's one of them. Make sure you know what I hope this works. A math problem looks like, because Amy today ran across a math problem that describes the year 2020.
Oh boy.
Okay, you're going down the stream at 2 miles an hour, and your canoe loses a tire. How much pancake batter does it take to re-roof your house?
Green.
Got it. You feel free to share that with your kids, and that's the math problem that describes the year 2020.
I hate it when my canoe loses a tire.
Well, especially when you have to figure out how much batter you need to re-roof your house.
Yeah.
Doesn't that describe this year, though?
Yes.
So what are we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I reckon we ought to talk about Proverbs chapters 28 and 29.
We still have to resolve, though, how we're going to divide up next week with 30 and 31.
Well, my offer to arm wrestle still stands, but
Yeah,
you
but
keep saying you have a different idea.
You'd have to spot me for weight and for age, and I have to promise not to bite you on your fingers.
Oh, I'm already handicapped.
I have a better suggestion. Whose wife has the birthday closest?
Well, you probably know the answer to that. I don't know.
Amy's birthday was the day before yesterday. So.
Oh, well, it's already passed then. We got to go all the way
it's not,
past
it's
it.
Not. It's either direction.
Oh, okay.
It's ambidirectional.
Ambidirectional. Okay.
I have one more test. We'll do that next week to figure out who does.
Next week? It's cutting a little close, isn't it?
You probably want to be ready for both chapters.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Well, let's start about Proverbs 28 tonight. Would be a good place to start, I hope, because you got 29 ready.
I did.
I'll start working on 28 along about now.
Okay.
And luckily next week it gets back to where they're grouped together a little bit more, especially the 31 is one long narrative, but even 30 is broken up into sections that are a little easier to handle. But we're still, right now it's gone back to just a variety of passages, and so we'll
hodgepodge.
A hodgepodge. That's the technical term. And so we'll go through and try to pick out some categories. And as always, remember that they're arbitrary, that we made them up, or I made them up. But and the first category that we run into beginning in verse 1 of chapter 28 is the difference between the righteous and the wicked. And so there are some of these proverbs just describe the difference between a righteous person and a wicked person. And verse 1 says, "The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion." It'd be very depressing to be helpless and hopeless in this world and not have any source of strength other than ourselves, that I can rely on me to do what needs to be done. And as Christians, we have a great benefit because we have a source of strength that nobody else has. And so the righteous can be bold, not because they're anything special, but because they serve God. But the wicked, what do they have to rely on? I mean, who's going to help them out? And so the wicked will flee for any reason, but the righteous are going to be bold. Evil men do not understand justice. And there are a lot of these proverbs that have to do with law and recognizing law and order. But the evil people just don't understand that. They don't understand justice. They don't understand fairness. But those who seek God understand all things. And we've seen a lot of passages that promise that if you seek me, you will find me. And so this seeking is not an empty pursuit. It's those who seek God will find him. And we will understand all things. There are lots of proverbs that talk about falling into your own pit. You know, you dig a pit, and then you come strolling along, and you fall into your own pit. You've set a trap for yourself, for somebody else, and you fall into the trap yourself. And that is so often the case with the wicked. And they're trying to lead the upright astray some evil way. He's going to fall into his own pit. But the blameless are going to get good things. The wicked are going to be falling into pits that they dug for themselves, and holes that they dug for themselves, but the blameless are going to inherit good. Verses 12 through 14 say, when the righteous triumph, there is great glory. But when the wicked rise, men hide themselves. He who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will find compassion. How blessed is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity. It's always a good thing when the righteous are victorious. Everybody appreciates that and understands that it's a good thing when the righteous triumph. When the wicked rise to power, though, it's time to hide, because bad things are going to happen and good things are not going to happen. That next verse is so important. He who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will find compassion. And that's as true for us today as it was back then. If we try to hide our sins, it's just going to eat us up. And the only way to deal with our sins and transgressions is to confess them and forsake them, and then we'll find compassion.
Right.
And so we need to be open with each other and help each other, be ready to help each other out. And that requires a certain relationship, because I'm not going to be open with somebody that I don't trust.
Right.
And they're not going to be open with me if they don't trust me. And so that's the wonderful thing about a group like this, is that we trust each other. And so we're willing to share our needs and our thoughts and our situations with each other, because we know how they'll be handled.
There are some rather prominent Bible stories about people who tried to hide their transgressions. If you think about Achan or Jonah or Ananias and Sapphira, and
those are all good examples. And a lot of times, and in the case of Achan, a lot of other people suffered as a result. It wasn't Ananias and Sapphira. It was they suffered, but in a lot of those, a lot of people suffered. Right. And even in Jonah's case, the ultimate result was that the people of Nineveh repented. But all the time he was resisting God, they weren't repenting. Right. And so God's will wasn't being carried out. So those are all good examples. Now, blessed is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity. And that's kind of a continuation of the same thing, that we have hard hearts, that we don't want to listen, we don't want to learn, we don't want to benefit. And we've seen so many times that the Proverbs praise someone who learns, who's willing to be corrected, to accept instruction, and so forth. And then verses 17 and 18, it says, a man who is laden with the guilt of human blood will be a fugitive until death. Let no one support him. He who walks blamelessly will be delivered, but he who is crooked will fall all at once. Of course, back then they had an avenger, a blood avenger. And so if someone killed somebody in the other person's family, then someone in that other family had the right to kill that person. And they even had these cities of refuge where they could go to be protected from that blood avenger. And so that was the arrangement back there. But the principle still is today that we need to do what's right. And we also need to maybe see a spiritual application of that those who die in their sins are lost. And so in a sense, if we refuse to share the gospel with other people, we're a little bit guilty of their loss. The decision is theirs to make, but it's up to us to share the gospel with them that'll make a difference in their lives. And to walk blamelessly doesn't mean that we're perfect, we don't have any sin, but as long as we're walking in the light, then we're walking blamelessly. But if we refuse to walk in the light, then we're going to fall. We've also seen several times that it's not good to show partiality, either for a rich man or a poor man or anything like that, but that justice should be honest and just. Because for a piece of bread, a man will transgress. Some people will sin for the slightest thing, for the smallest thing. And then verses 24 through 26, he who robs his father or his mother and says it is not a transgression is a companion of a man who destroys. That makes me think of Mark 7:11, where Jesus talks about, what you could have given to your parents is korban, dedicated to God, is an excuse for taking care of your responsibilities. Right. And so, and it's a little bit like what we saw maybe last week or the week before, when someone who says something and then when they get caught, they say, I was just joking. Yeah. I was just kidding. An arrogant man stirs up strife, but he who trusts in the Lord will prosper. And he who trusts in his own heart is a fool. but he who walks wisely will be delivered. And once again, a little bit of humility goes a long way. And pride is often the roadblock to doing what we should be doing. And if we're trusting in our own selves, in our own hearts, we're fools. But if we walk wisely, then it's going to go well. And then, this is similar to what we saw earlier. In verse 28, it says, when the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. And it's just not a good thing when the wicked gain power. Mm-hmm. It's just a good time to run and hide. But when they're out of the way, then righteousness will increase. Some of the verses one of the verses actually has to do with understanding and knowledge, and that's verse 2. And it says, by the transgression of a land, many are its princes, but a man of understanding and knowledge. But by a man of understanding and knowledge, so it endures. A lot of times in a nation, and if it has bad rulers, they just seem to multiply, mm-hmm. and more of them, because there's just chaos. But if you have the right single person, it's going to be a benefit to the nation and to the land. And it's interesting to read the history of different countries. And I think you mentioned a little bit about that this morning, but about nations and the history of kings and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you have times and period where a country might have several kings, and it's just all chaos. There are a few of the verses that talk about the contrast between the rich and the poor. The poor man who oppresses the lowly is like a driving rain which leaves no food. And there's that example again of a pouring rain that just causes destruction. Mm-hmm. And the more it rains, the worse it gets. And how sad it is when someone who's in the same situation as somebody else, but they oppress that person because they feel somehow that raises them up, if they can bring that person down. Here you have a poor person who's oppressing basically someone else who's poor, mm-hmm. just because he can get by with it. It's better to be poor and walk in integrity than being crooked and being rich, because it's not the amount of wealth that we have, but the integrity we have is our real wealth. The rich man is wise in his own eyes, but the poor who has understanding sees through him. And that rich man is probably wise in his own eyes because of pride again. He thinks he's accomplished a whole lot because he's gained a lot of money, and he doesn't have the humility to understand that that's not the case. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who makes haste to be rich will not go unpunished. And Paul tells Timothy about the love of money being the root of all kinds of evil, and those who are rich should not rely on their riches. Mm-hmm. And so a person who makes haste to be rich, this is somebody who that's all they care about, is making money, mm-hmm. and it's not going to go well for them. He who gives to the poor will never want, but he who shuts his eyes will have many curses. And that gets us back to Jesus' statement in Matthew, where he's talking about the separation of the sheep and the goats. And when did we see you needing these things? And he said, as you did it to those other people, you did it to me. And the same is opposite about those who refuse to help the other. And so if we are ready to help those who need, we're never going to lack. When God will take care of us. And then there are a few verses, 3 verses that deal with the law. And again, remember how important order and law keeping are throughout the Bible. And he says that those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive with them or with the wicked. And so among all those who are lawbreakers, unlawful, they think the wicked are great. But those who keep the law try to stop those who forsake the law, obviously. He who keeps the law is a discerning son, but he who is a companion of gluttons humiliates his father. And those seem like disconnected things at first. But I looked that word gluttons up in what did you call it?
A dictionary.
A dictionary. And it can also mean a riotous person.
Okay.
A glutton or a riotous person. Some translations probably says he who is a companion of riotous men humiliates his father. And so the contrast is there for someone who keeps order and someone who does not.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one who keeps the law makes his parents proud. Someone who associates with people who don't care about rules, glutton, you don't care about eating properly, but some just don't care about anything. Claude? Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. That Jesus was associated with, or accused of associating with gluttons and drunkards, and so that was probably a curse to say against somebody. Hey, you hang around with gluttons, and that's a good point. And it's probably not just because they eat a whole lot. It's probably because they don't follow rules. They go to excess. They just whatever they want to do, they do it, because a glutton and a drunkard are people just have no boundaries. They just keep right on. So that's a good comparison. That was even in Jesus' day. If you want to say something bad about somebody, he hangs around with gluttons. And so that may be associated with this very proverb,
Mm-hmm.
that they had that idea. He who turns away his ear from listening to the law, even his prayer is an abomination. We're trying to decide what we want to cover next, what we want to take a look at next. And one of the things we're thinking about is Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation. Another good suggestion has been Isaiah. It would be another good one to do. Or we could do minor prophets. We could do a whole bunch of stuff, but probably not all at once.
It'd be hard to do all at once.
But there comes a time when God tells his prophets, don't even pray for them.
Right.
They become so wicked, I'm not going to hear you. I do not want you to pray for them, because I will not hear you if you pray for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there comes a point. This is not say that God doesn't hear us when we sin, when we make mistakes. When it talks about God doesn't hear sinners, that does not mean he doesn't hear non-Christians who are praying to be led to the truth or to find the truth. But this is someone who insists on disobeying God. This is someone who turns his ear from listening to the law. He doesn't want to hear what God has to say. And if he thinks God appreciates his prayer, he's mistaken, because God says, your prayer is an abomination to me. And I don't know how it gets much worse than being an abomination.
Yeah. Well, that is, the idea of those who would live contrary to God's will and then pray to God for his blessing for the way that they're living. God obviously is not going to bless that. I used to see bumper stickers a lot that said, the bumper sticker said, God bless the whole world, no exceptions.
Yeah.
And I always had trouble with that bumper sticker, because there are a lot of people who deny God's existence. And if we're by saying bless those people, it means they need to find the truth so that they can learn about God, then yes, I want them to be blessed. But to bless them in their current course of action or their current life choices, I don't think we should pray that.
No, and that's right. We know that God loves all of us so much that he gave Jesus to die for us, but people often misrepresent that.
Right.
And God is a God of law and justice and judgment, and there are a lot of things that says God hates these things.
Right.
And so just to make a blanket statement that everything is okay with God is misrepresentation. So that you're right. But we need to be careful about this verse. I think that if we don't listen to God, then he doesn't want to listen to us. It's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. And if we want him to listen to us, we need to listen to him.
Right.
There's a pair of verses that talk about the nation. Like a roaring lion and a rushing bear is a wicked ruler over a poor people. A leader who is a great oppressor lacks understanding. And it is so true that if you look throughout history, when they had bad rulers and dictators and how they treated their people and how they lacked understanding, but the one who hates unjust gain will prolong his days. He's not open to bribery, he's not open to unjust influence, but he's going to do what's right no matter what. There is one verse that talks about work, and it's this is just a familiar statement from Proverbs. He who tills his land will have plenty of food. If you work, you're going to have something to eat. But if you're a sluggard and you're always following the empty things, you're not going to have anything to eat. What? So you plowed Okay, what was the first part of it? The plow deep? Slow to sleep and plow deep.
Plow deep while the sluggards sleep. You'll have some
Okay.
to sell and some to eat.
Okay, good.
Some to keep. Yeah.
That's a good thing to follow. But if you're out there plowing while the sluggards are over there sleeping, then you're going to end up with enough to eat and enough to sell, and they're going to end up with nothing. That's a good saying. Must have been a wise man. I think there were a lot of good, hard-working, work ethic people that knew. To them, they didn't know anything but work. They got up in the morning and they just worked. It wasn't inherited to be a good farmer. Well, luckily you know how to drive a Caterpillar, and so that'll keep food on the table. But I like that saying. And then the last one in this chapter has to do with the tongue. And he who rebukes a man will afterward find more favor than he who flatters with the tongue. Initially, we're going to lean toward the person who flatters us. Just our initial reaction is, if someone says something nice about us, then we're going to respond favorably. And it gets back to the idea of accepting correction. Ultimately, if we stop and think about it, if the praise was praise and not flattery kind of is an empty thing.
Right.
If it was a positive statement, that's good. I mean, that's good to say nice things about each other. But if we come to the realization that someone's just flattering us, just buttering us up, and later on we realize he was making fun of me. I mean, he was ridiculing me because he was saying something that was not true. It's better for someone to, if you need it, to say something true, sincerely with love, than to just flatter somebody.
Right.
And there's a lot to do with how we go about something. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, we'd rather have someone give us some honest correction than dishonest praise, flattery. And that brings us up to chapter
29.
Who has 29?
Must be my turn.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Okay.
If we go back a couple of weeks to chapter 25, I think it was, it started out by saying that these were the Proverbs of Solomon that were collected by Hezekiah.
Yeah.
And there's not been anything since chapter 25 that tells us that's different.
Yeah.
So are we still in the section that was collected by Hezekiah?
I would say that's a good guess.
I think that's an interesting thought as
Yes.
we kind of picture how the book of. I mean, we know when you think about how Ephesians was written. It was a letter. Paul wrote a letter, but when you think about how Proverbs was written, it's a collection of proverbs that kind of grew over time, and so you have some that were collected and put together by Solomon. Then, 200 years later, is it Hezekiah, or is it 150 years later or so that's Hezekiah?
Yeah.
But these are Proverbs of Solomon that have made it that far. They've been handed down through the generations, and then Hezekiah collected them into the chapters that we have that were kind of tacked on to the end of the Proverbs that were there. So, and all of that, go ahead.
I would say, of course, you're already ahead on this, but chapters 30 and 31 begin with attributing it to somebody.
To somebody, right.
And the last time it was attributed to somebody was
chapter 25.
Yeah.
So 25 through 29 appear, I would think, and without having gone deep into research on that, would be part of the same collection. And all that to take note of the first section of Proverbs that we see. And when you think about, if you go back through those chapters, 25 through 29, it seems like every chapter has at least a couple of Proverbs about rulers, and about how rulers behave. So when you think about Hezekiah kind of reading through perhaps a collection of Solomon's old Proverbs and kind of pulling some out and saying, these are going to go into my collection that I want to keep together, it's interesting to see how often he pulls out Proverbs that have to do with being a good ruler. And so as we read through this first collection here, just kind of have that in the back of your mind, that these were selected by Hezekiah, who was a king. So verses 1, 2, and 4 there, a man who hardens his neck after much reproof will suddenly be broken beyond remedy. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, people groan. It's very similar to couple that you had. The king gives stability to the land by justice, but a man who takes bribes overthrows it. And so there, again, we've got like, maybe 6 or 8 of these that have to do with rulers. And the first, about 8 of them, and the first 6 have to do with the ruler himself, not how people respond to the ruler, but how the ruler behaves. And so what kind of ruler are we looking for here? We're looking for a righteous man. We're looking for somebody who is concerned about justice. And when we have people that are the opposite of that, then the land suffers. But when we have people who are concerned about righteousness and justice, then the land sees prosperity and the land thrives.
And there are a number of passages in the New Testament that talk about the government being established by God to punish evildoers.
Right.
And to create stability, because under stability, the kingdom, God's kingdom has a chance to flourish. And so, this carries right over the New Testament.
Right. So as we look at the next section, then verses 12 and following there, if a ruler pays attention to falsehood, all his ministers become wicked. And boy, what an important that one is. If a ruler is bad, those who serve under him are going to follow his lead, and they're going to accept bribes. They're going to be people who don't concern themselves with justice. But if the top man, the king, is concerned with justice and does things correctly, then his ministers have to know, those who serve under him have to know that if I'm the wicked one, he's going to expose me. He's going to not accept that. Verse 14, if a king judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. That's another great observation. Where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained, but happy is he who keeps the law. And many seek the ruler's favor, but justice for man comes from the Lord. With these last couple here, I think we have kind of the other direction. We have not how the ruler behaves, but how people behave toward the ruler. And so if we have a leader with vision, without vision, then the people kind of do what they want to do, but happy is he who keeps the law. If you are a lawkeeper, and I think Peter gets into that, Romans gets into that, if we are people who keep the law, then our lives are going to be okay. We don't have to fear the government. And then the idea of seeking the ruler's favor. A lot of people want to be friends with the king, thinking that it will benefit them in some way. But ultimately, justice comes from the Lord. We don't want to seek the king's favor. We want to seek the Lord's favor. And so having our priorities straight there is an important thing for us. We have another section here on the righteous, and that by transgression an evil man is ensnared, but the righteous sings and rejoices. I like that picture.
I do too. Some of these pictures are just beautiful. I love that one.
Yeah, I'd much rather sing and rejoice than be caught in a snare. So don't transgress, right?
Exactly.
The righteous is concerned for the rights of the poor. The wicked does not understand such concern. There again, I think some of these are just such common sense statements. Well, you read that and you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense, that those who are concerned about righteousness are going to take notice of the poor, and we're going to do what we can to affect them. But if all I think about is myself, if I'm a wicked person and I'm arrogant and I'm prideful and boastful and all of those things that we've talked about, then I'm not going to notice somebody else's pain. I'm not going to notice somebody else's need. And so that line that exists that separates those who are righteous versus those who are wicked is just brought very clear to us, or made very clear to us here in these passages. Men of bloodshed hate the blameless, but the upright are concerned for his life. Why is it that criminals look for easy targets? They hate the blameless. You're living a life that convicts me of my own wrongdoing, that convicts me of my own sin. And so because of that, I hate you for the way that you don't go out and do the things that I'm doing, and so I'm going to punish you for it. But those who are upright are concerned for the lives of the blameless. And so, we treat people with respect. When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their fall. Not much to add there. I mean, that is one that just makes sense. An unjust man is abominable to the righteous, and he who is upright in the way is abominable to the wicked. Just another restatement of several of those that we've seen before. There's a difference between those who are righteous and those who are wicked, and they don't play nice together. The righteous don't accept the lifestyle of the wicked, and the wicked don't accept the lifestyle of the righteous. And I think that's okay. We shouldn't accept their lifestyles.
Was it Saul who said, "Don't let the one who puts on his armor boast as the one who takes it off"?
Right? Yeah.
And so in that case, the righteous will see the fall of the wicked. Just because you put your armor on doesn't mean you're going to be taking it off at the end of the day.
Right. And that is so important that the wicked take note of the way the righteous live, and they want to put an end to their lives. They want to change the way they live. They want to drag them down. The righteous take note of the way the wicked live, and they change their own behavior. That I see how your wickedness affects those around you, and I'm going to do something different for myself. I'm going to choose my own behavior to be different, while the wicked project and they want to change the way the righteous live. And so, it's just a different viewpoint, a different way of looking at life. Another section that we have here is on discipline. We've talked over and over through Proverbs about how the wicked refuse discipline. They won't allow themselves to be corrected, versus the wise are constantly looking to grow. And if there's a need for discipline in my life, then I want somebody to show me that correction. So here we have some passages. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother.
That's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, how do we get wisdom? Well, we get wisdom through discipline. And if you don't discipline a child, then they won't get any wisdom, and they and you both are going to be miserable. But if you teach them some wisdom by the seat of their pants sometimes, then that's okay if they learn from that.
And I think you've mentioned before that when it talks about mother or father, it's not always restrictive. The same thing is true about your father, that the one child who gets his own way shames his father, but Solomon chooses one or the other just to make a point.
Right, exactly. Verse 17, correct your son and he will give you comfort. He will also delight your soul. That's the positive aspect of it. That's the beautiful side of that family relationship, that if you raise your child with that, to be wise, if you give them that correction they need and they accept that correction, then as your years advance, they will be there to comfort you. They will be a source of comfort as your life progresses. A slave will not be instructed by words alone, for though he understands, there will be no response. And these last couple kind of went in to this subcategory of discipline, even though we've kind of moved on there from the idea of a child into something that's not very socially acceptable to talk about now, is the idea of having slaves. But this is not a statement of pro-slavery. This is just a statement about how you interact with one another. And we could think about employer-employee relationships, or we think about things that apply here. But a slave will not be instructed by words alone, for though he understands, there will be no response. So what do you think of that one? That one seems to go against our modern culture.
It goes very much against our modern culture, but there are good ways and bad ways for employers to treat employees. But if you have employees who just won't listen and don't do their work and don't do the job, it doesn't do any good just to let it keep on going.
Right.
And it needs some kind of direction, or it's just not going to work.
Right. And so whether that looks like an official reprimand in your file, or a docking of wages, or a loss of commission, or
there has to be some consequence. If there's no consequence,
that's what it takes to get the attention of the one who needs to make a change.
Yeah.
And if no change is made, then we can't continue with the way we're going.
And it's not good for the employee either to think that, to develop that lifestyle. They need to learn responsibility. We all need to learn responsibility.
I like this last one, though. He who pampers his slave from childhood will in the end find him to be a son. And so while verse 19 seems to be talking about kind of being harsh in the way that you treat that underling, verse 21 flips it around and talks about pampering the underling or the slave. So, it's kind of the same with children. If we're always harsh with our children, then we can call that discipline, we can call that instruction, but in the end, that's sowing the seeds of resentment. And so there needs to be the opposite side of that coin as well, that is the pampering and the love and the happiness and the joy that go along with it. And so how do we turn that underling or that slave, that employee, whatever, into an ally on our side? Well, it's not just through harsh treatment. That won't do it, harsh treatment alone. And so we've got to do the pampering there as well. I like that section. Our next section here is about the wise. A man who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but he who keeps company with harlots wastes his wealth. Harken back to the first 8 chapters, 9 chapters of Proverbs that we read that had all those illustrations and all those stories about the ladies of the evening, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly that chased after the young men, and how often that use of the word harlot or words like that were demonstrated to be those that would lead men astray. And so a man who loves wisdom does not chase after those things and makes his father glad, but he who keeps company with harlots wastes his wealth, and in the end is going to disappoint his father. When a wise man has a controversy with a foolish man, the foolish man either rages or laughs, and there is no rest. I think last week you had a couple of proverbs about do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him.
Exactly.
And then another one that said, answer a fool as his folly deserves,
Yeah.
so that he is not wise in his own eyes.
Yeah.
And this kind of makes me think of that. You get stuck in that revolving door with a foolish man, and in the end, you're going to end up looking like a fool.
Yeah.
Because you're doing the same thing he's doing.
The foolish person's either going to get angry or laugh because they don't have any other way to deal with it. They can't deal with it on a logical level. They can't discuss something. They're either going to ridicule or get really angry.
And there is no rest, I think, leads to the idea that there is no resolution. We don't fix the problem. You can't argue a foolish man out of being foolish.
No.
But that's it. Walk away.
That's often the very best way is just go, because the more you stay, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
It's just, you might as well argue with the door, with the fence post, because you're not going to get anywhere. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So you're right.
Right.
More often than not, I think that's probably the wisest decision. Just go.
Yeah. We have a section here on anger. Anger. Scorners set a city aflame, but wise men turn away anger. And a fool always loses his temper, but a wise man holds it back. Scorners set a city aflame. Wow. They can tear things down. They can. Have we seen any examples of that in modern day?
I think that might be pretty up to date.
I think that might be the new city motto for Portland.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so, or maybe some other cities as well. The idea of holding back your temper, being able to control that emotion. Anger is a God-given emotion. There is an appropriate place for anger in our lives. And there are times when anger is an appropriate response. But to act in anger in a way that goes beyond the person God has called us to be, or goes too far, is not acceptable. And so a wise man is able to hold back, if not holding back the feelings of anger, at least being able to hold back the actions that anger might lead to. And so that's kind of what we want to really draw on from that.
And not only will he turn away his own anger, but if he responds correctly, he will turn away anger of the others.
Right.
He will diffuse the
proverb
situation
about that?
instead of pouring fire.
A gentle answer turns away
wrath.
wrath. Yeah. Verse 20 there, do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. That's bold for Proverbs, for the things that we've seen about a fool and how bad they are.
Now we've
and
seen
how
that
hopeless
list,
they are.
and fool's kind of at the bottom of the list.
Fool is a bad place to be. You don't want to be designated as a fool, but somebody who is hasty in his words. If only we had some scriptures that would teach us how not to be hasty in our words.
That would be if we had some songs about angry words, or let them never from your tongue unbridled slip. May they.
That's a good one.
You should write that.
I'll get right on it.
Okay.
I think I know a tune for it too.
Oh, good. That's good.
But James talks about the tongue, and it's a restless evil full of deadly poison, and it's full of fire, and it's like the rudder of a ship, or the bridle in a horse's mouth. All of those things, and hasty words. I mean, how many of us have hurt people because we spoke quicker than we should have, or we said things in the heat of the moment that we shouldn't have said, and that we never would have said had we not been angry, or had we not been hasty in the things that we said. And once those things are said, they're there. You can't take them back. You can't put them back in. And so, just be aware of that. An angry man stirs up strife, and a hot-tempered man abounds in transgression. This just occurred to me. Sometimes there's been some subjects where it seems like it talks to the ladies a lot and we make the statement, it's not just about ladies, it's about the action.
Yeah.
But when we get here to this one on anger, how come it's all about men?
And I was noticing that too, that a lot of these things refer to men. We don't notice those. We talk about, dripping water and stuff compared
Yeah.
to a wife or whatever. But when it gets into these things like angry and fools and these things, it's a man.
It is. Do we need to warn the women about these things as
No,
well?
they don't have that problem.
They don't have that problem. Okay.
Only the men do.
That's
So
good to know.
They drip a lot from, like water
I didn't say that.
dripping from the ceiling.
No, I didn't. I did not concur with that statement.
maybe I should not have been hasty in my words. Can I take that back?
Too late.
Okay.
All right. So an angry man stirs up strife. You mad, bro?
No, I'm happy.
Okay. And a hot-tempered man abounds in transgression. A man's pride will bring him low, but a humble spirit will obtain honor. This one talked about pride rather than anger, but I stuck it in here because it kind of follows the theme of just letting an emotion that God has given us go too far.
Yeah.
And God has given us the emotion of pride. There's nothing wrong with doing a job well and feeling a sense of completion, a sense of honor or accomplishment for what you've done. But if you take that too far and make it all about you, then that pride has gone too far. God has given us anger as a response to things that happen around us. But if we let that go too far, then it becomes a problem. And so, a man's pride can go too far and it can bring him low. I don't think we can be too humble, can we?
I don't think.
I don't know how we
it's
could
possible.
be too humble.
I think it's impossible to have too much humility.
There's some emotions that we need to keep in check and hold back. There are other emotions that we need to cultivate and get them to grow. And I think humility is one of those that we just need to continually cultivate.
There might be a false humility,
Sure.
A self
Sure.
abasement or something. But a true, sincere humility.
Right.
I don't think you can have too much of it.
Okay. And as you cultivate that humility, then pride will naturally wane and become smaller.
Yeah,
So
they're opposites.
yeah. So, all right. Well, we have a few left that just kind of didn't fit into any category, so this is our miscellaneous few here at the end. A man who flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his steps. And you talked about flattery some back in chapter 28, and so that idea of it's great to praise people when they've done a good job. It's great to give credit where credit is due, but just to spread flattery to try to gain favor of somebody who can maybe help you out down the road or help you in the immediate context is not acceptable. And so just don't treat people that way. Don't do it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
A sincere compliment is great. I mean, it helps build each other up.
And I think flattery assumes insincerity almost.
Yeah.
And so I think they're opposites of each other.
It's not hard sometimes too to figure out someone who does that all the time. If
Sure.
they're always throwing out something and you know that it's not sincere.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's so they can get something back in some other time.
Trying to build favor.
It becomes pretty obvious. We appreciate sincere praise because
Right.
we know the person who's giving it is sincere. But I think we a lot of times recognize flattery too.
The poor man and the oppressor have this in common: the Lord gives light to the eyes of both. Makes me think isn't there a passage about the rain falls on the just and the unjust? And I think sometimes we look at the life of or the situation of somebody that we would consider to be dishonest or somebody maybe that we're just waiting for the lightning strike to zap them because we know they deserve it, and yet they continue to prosper. We can't necessarily take somebody's outward blessings or outward way that they're living as tacit approval from God that He is saying that they are doing what He wants them to do. The only thing that we can say, if they both have vision, if they both have sight, well, God gave sight to the poor and to the oppressed, and to the one who's oppressing them. So, that's as far as it goes. God didn't bless the oppressor because he's oppressing. Sometimes the bad guy wins. It's just the way life is.
Yeah. I wonder if this verse is also directed to the oppressor, that he needs to understand as he's oppressing the poor man, that God gave that poor man the same,
Right.
and maybe the poor man is farther ahead because he sees with his eyes and the oppressor may not see.
Right.
And
Yep.
so sometimes the oppressor needs to be reminded that the same God made both of them. And,
Right.
and when we criticize the pot, we're criticizing the potter.
Yeah.
And so maybe part of that's addressed to the oppressor.
Yep. Verse 24 there, he who is a partner with a thief hates his own life. He hears the oath, but tells nothing. I had to do a little reading on this one because it didn't make any sense
Sometimes they
to
don't.
me. So this goes back to the idea that that first of all, if you're in cahoots with somebody who's a thief, then you're guilty of what they're guilty of. So if they get caught and are condemned, then you deserve the same punishment. The idea of hearing the oath but telling nothing. If you hear somebody take an oath and say that they either didn't do something or did do something, and you know that their oath is that they've told a lie, that they perjured themselves, and you don't say anything, then you're guilty of the same crime. So that's the idea of this idea of hearing the oath but saying nothing. You know what really happened, but you're not telling the truth. And so silence, sometimes we think we can sit back and just, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to be a party to that. I didn't have anything to do with it, and so I'm just going to sit back and say nothing. Well, we need to be careful with that attitude, because sitting back and saying nothing, you can make the case that makes you guilty of what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we need to actively be on the side of right, not just, we need to speak up in favor of what's right, not just sit quietly back and hope that right wins without us. Verse 25, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. So there, the idea of putting our respect, the fear there, that idea of respect and obedience to, or whatever. If we put our trust in men, then there's a downfall in that. But when we put our trust in the Lord, we will be lifted up.
And that maybe is a good description of what it means to fear God. We do need to fear God because He's all powerful and He's the judge and everything else. So, but when we talk about fearing God, it has more to do with respect.
Right.
He's not out to get us.
Absolutely.
And so we need to associate fearing God with trusting Him and relying on Him.
Right.
Okie dokie, are we through?
Well, almost.
What else we lack?
We got some questions, I think. Don't
questions. Anybody have any questions?
Because we've got some.
If you don't have any, we'll give you some.
What are some of the differences between the wicked and the righteous? Just a few. You don't have to list them all.
Are they about the same?
Is it hard to tell the difference?
Right.
Yep.
It often boils down to the choices that we make. We generally get what we seek, and it is a question of the right choices. And there was a whole list of verses that deal with the wicked and the righteous. And the first one is the wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous is as bold as a lion. There's just that whole long list that describe the differences between what happens to the wicked and what happens to the righteous.
Yep.
How are those who forsake God's law described? And that's another thing that goes through a lot of the Proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
And there are various ways that they're described, but it's never good. And how are those who keep God's law described? It's always a contrast. There are those who forsake God's law and keep His law, and there's a contrast between those two.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Why is it so important for rulers to act justly? It's
a good question.
Well, it has to do with how their kingdom, I suppose, how their kingdom prospers or how their kingdom is established. It has to do with how the people will respond to them. It has to do with how their hierarchy of rulers underneath them will respond. If they are acting, if the ruler or the king is acting justly, then It's a good example for those who are his underlings to act justly as well.
We saw several verses tonight, didn't we, that talk about when the wicked rule, people run and hide.
Right.
But when the righteous rule, then good things happen.
Why will the righteous outlast the wicked?
Will the righteous outlast the wicked?
Yes,
Yes.
because God's on their side.
That's the reason why.
Why?
And- Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Why is it important to keep our anger under control? Somewhere it says, be angry and yet do not sin. Let the sun not set on your anger,
On your wrath.
on your wrath. And James says, be slow to anger.
Slow to speak,
And
slow to anger,
Quick to hear. And so it's important to keep our anger under control. Why?
Things can snowball really fast. Yeah.
Yep. And that's why it's better to defuse it some way, or as Claude suggested, sometimes just turn around and walk away.
Have you ever argued with anyone?
No.
No?
No, I've never.
Well, for those of us who are mortal, have you ever been in an argument with somebody
No.
and then at some moment of that argument thought, how did we get here? How did this even happen?
You usually can't figure it out
Yeah.
by the time you get there. How you?
Yeah, how did I
even
get
though I've,
this
I've
mad?
never experienced it personally.
Yeah, you've
I've
seen
heard.
it?
I've
Yeah.
seen it.
You've counseled
And
with those?
I've
Yeah,
heard.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
I think, well,
were you going to get some
I want
Proverbs
to hear from Amy on
about
that one.
lying or what? Those are some good questions to think about.
Yeah.
And next week we'll sort out who does chapter 30 and chapter 31. I have a really good way to
Okay.
determine that.
You've been lobbying for this for a while now, I think.
Yeah, I know.
might have to just yield.
No, you don't. I think you'll do a good job with that. It's only right if you pass the test next time that you can have chapter 31.
Or that worries me.
And we don't ever want to not offer an opportunity for people to obey the gospel. It's clear in the Proverbs and other places that things do depend on the choices we make. And the first choice, James says, in humility receive the word implanted that's able to save your souls. And so we have to start with humility to listen to what the Bible has to say. And so we hope everybody's reading and studying their Bible. And if there's someone who may be watching or listening that would like to sit down with their Bible and open their Bible, or anybody here that wants to just sit down and just see what their Bible has to say about salvation and important things, would we be available to do that, or are we too busy?
We could find time.
It's interesting that people are so kind and they don't want to bother us, and they're apologetic. There is nothing we like more in the whole wide world
That's right.
than sitting down and opening the Bible with someone who's sincerely seeking the truth. That's what we live for.
Right.
And there is nothing else that's a priority over people. I mean, there are things that we do, but that's not people.
Right.
And so if there's somebody who wants to learn more about the Bible, we will find a way
Right.
to do that. And that's just our source of pleasure.
Yes. That's right.
And once they do that, what kinds of things are they going to learn about salvation and about their soul?
Well, they're going to learn that the Bible has the answers to their questions regarding salvation and regarding the condition of their soul, and they can know. It's not a situation where you just have to kind of roll the dice and hope for the best. It is God has provided a plan for the salvation of mankind, and there doesn't need to be any doubt.
No. And we can know, and it's not because of what we do or our deeds, although obedience is always an element.
It's because of the promise of
it's
God.
because of the promise of God and because of the blood of Jesus.
Right.
And that's why we can rely on power that's ultimate power, because the power is in the blood of Jesus. And so if we are buried with Jesus in baptism and come up out of that baptism to start a new life, then his blood continues to wash away our sins as we walk in the light.
Right.
And so it's not that we're all that great, it's just that we rely on the true power in his blood. And so if anybody has made that decision that they want to be buried with Jesus in baptism, we say the water's warm, but it's usually true. It's usually true that it's been warmed up. I turn it on every Sunday morning, drain some and add some warm water, and it's still warm enough tonight. That's not something you put off till next week or next month or next year. It affects our salvation, our eternal destiny. We need to be like the Ethiopian that
Right.
saw some water and said, "What hinders me from being baptized?"
It's important enough to do even if the water isn't warm.
Even if it's not warm. If you have to break the ice to go into the pond, you won't be the first one to do that.
Right.
And so the temperature of the water doesn't make any difference.
Right.
And we do want to always emphasize that if anybody's struggling in some way, either struggling with sin or personal problems, challenges in their lives, we know people face a lot of things now. And we want to sit down with them and pray with them, pray for them, and do whatever we can. And again, don't think we're too busy. People are our priority, and that's all that matters. And so,
That's right.
if there's anybody that we can help in any way, and we'll do that in just a minute as we stand and sing. And if you're watching us or listening to us, please contact us and let us know so that we can help you. And Chuck will lead us in an invitation song and provide that opportunity.